Si hay una comedia romántica que me encanta, esa es About Time, que tuve la suerte de hablar con su diseñador de producción, con John Paul Kelly, que me contó qué significó para él trabajar con un ícono de la comedia romántica como Richard Curtis y cómo fue el proceso de trabajo en lo que él definió como la película definitiva del estilo, del género, de la construcción de comedias románticas de Richard Curtis. Hablamos de cómo fue mantener cierta continuidad en esto de los viajes del tiempo y las cosas que iban cambiando, y también de cuál es para él el factor determinante a la hora de considerar a esta película un clásico de las comedias románticas. Todo esto en este informe sobre About Time.
We now return to Mira Akien and Contré with our latest interview.
I met Richard and realized, I think realized it was his the ultimate film really for his personality. It's exactly what Richard's about. You know, he really believes the world should be a better and kinder and gentler place, and if we all behaved like that, we'd have a happier life. You know, and it's the life he leads. He has a very blessed life with a gorgeous family and people around him, and he really makes sure that his life is what About Time is about.
There's this family secret that the men in the family can travel in time.
This is such a weird joke.
It's not a joke.
It felt like a very important film in its silliness, you know, and its lightheartedness, but in a way it's the, I suppose, the ultimate work from really, I suppose, how I saw Richard's philosophy of life, you know. So so that made it very exciting, and of course that also meant it was very close to his heart and very important to him. So you know, that had its challenges to make sure I was designing it in a way that you know, felt like it brought that story to life for him.
You go into a dark place, clench your fists, think of the moment you're going to, and you'll find yourself there.
It's going to be a complicated year.
It's going to be a complicated life.
How was like developing this world for you, in which every time he travels to the past and then comes back, it's like slightly different? And what was like maybe the constant in a sea of variants that you have to maintain in each of the timelines that you portray in this movie?
Well, I mean, the kind of the logic was a little bit loose, really, because it had to be, because there are sort of pitfalls in the logic of how he goes back and how things change. So we were a little bit careful not to change very much. That it tended to be the details of. There were certain rules, for example, that if he went back before his child was born, that child wouldn't be there. So, but in terms of the moments that he went back to, we tried to keep those pretty unaltered, really. So, you know, the car accident was different, but that was the detail of the car accident that was different because he changed something, but actually the environment and where he lived. So when he came home and he had a son instead of a daughter, because he'd gone back before the birth of his daughter, we you know, the environment was kept pretty much the same, because there was too many variables, really, and I think you needed the audience to go along with this, you know, so you had to kind of you know, have as little challenge as possible, really, for people to kind of believe the logic of this. And you know, I mean, it's a very light-hearted idea, the idea of going back in time, but it's kind of a serious one as well. So I think yeah, the circumstances changed more than the sets. We pretty much kept those the same.
I never said you could fix everything, not without consequences.
It's so good to see you.
We've never met before.
Oh no.
We kind of tried to keep it of its time, really, when we made it, you know. So I mean, I think it's you know, the world that they lived in, I think, is probably pretty much what you saw on Instagram at that time, or on Pinterest, you know, however many years ago it was, probably 10 years ago. So we tried to keep it really in that moment, and I think the more interesting sort of journey that was happening was the journey that they were making as a couple in their young marriage together, and you know, starting in rented accommodations, and you know, living with a friend of the family, and then you know, them finding their first flat together, and then their first house. And I mean, it was all speeded up a little bit, and in a kind of a Richard Curtis classic way, you know, their life was pretty privileged and blessed, I think, compared to most people's, So he was a successful lawyer, and they lived in a lovely house, and the family house in Cornwall was out of a dream, So it was. It was more about showing the progression of their lives, really. That was kind of interesting, rather than the passage in time, to date it to a year felt less important, I think, to us than telling the story of the characters. And I suppose what's important to say as well is because you're reinventing your history constantly, you can make your world pretty darn nice, and that wasn't a priority of the characters in About Time, but it did mean that they got to live in a very nice house by the sea, that was hopefully eclectic rather than just privilege, and felt like somewhere that real people lived, rather than somewhere that was that had so much luck it didn't know what to do with itself.
I'm Tim.
I'm Mary.
It's my mother's name.
I remind you of your mother?
Obviously, I should have thought these through more. Could you give me 1 second?
Yeah, Donald and Rachel, it was really delightful. I mean, it helps that they're both two of the absolute loveliest people you could ever meet. So I think that made their lives easier, I think, and all our lives. So we had the most fabulous summer together, all of us, and they had a great screen presence together. It was wonderful. I mean, particularly memorable really was when we were down in Cornwall filming the house scenes. We were there for sort of 3 or 4 weeks, and it was during the London Olympics, which was quite strange because everybody here, I don't know if you had an Olympics in your hometown, but everybody in this country, wanted to be there, and we were at the other end of the country, but we had the most special time watching it on the opening on TV. And Richard had written one of the sketches that was performed at the opening of the Olympics, so we all sat around with Donal and Rachel as well, and just laughed and had a wonderful time. So it was great to see them together on screen. And I think they really worked on screen as a couple, a really unlikely couple. But certainly it was all helped along by how good a time we all had together. It was very nice. People really identify with the film, I think, particularly around the relationship of Donal and Bill Nye, and father and son, and I think it's maybe that's something that it doesn't get talked about that much, is that very affectionate relationship between father and son, and doesn't get featured in films or romantic comedies, or by their definition of their name, they're about romance, but not the romance between a father and a son, So it's I think that really resonates with people particularly, and I would say if it's got a winning factor, it's that actually over the romance between Donal and Rachel.
Time catches up to all of us.
My son.
My dad. I try to live every day as if it was the final day of my extraordinary, ordinary life.